are now driving along Highway 206 on our way to Washington State by way of the town of Glasgow, and we had left Condon about 15 minutes ago. And we noticed we were surrounded by these wonderful peaks off in the distance, from Jefferson to Hood to St. Helens to Adams and on to Rainier. But that's in a different video. What we're going to talk about now is something I had mentioned in a previous video in association with the game of ACES to ACES, which of course is a cardboard and role-playing game that we have sponsored here on the Golden Phoenix Publish. We've already talked about the various suits and the fact that the suits of the 52 cards in the deck all relate to different parts of life. So in a sense, it's a game of life. And in the particular game of ACES to ACES, we covered the fact that the suit of Spades has to do to life in this world, having to do with surviving and thriving and getting ahead, and then finally having some real power and influence in society, or at least in your local neighborhood. And then we had already talked about the completely opposite deck of cards called the clubs, which we call the archetypal as opposed to the material world. And on that realm, it's all about tension and energy coming down and impacting the world, creating tension. And that tension can lead to a buildup of crisis. And from that crisis has to come solutions, one way or the other, to a final resolution of whatever the crisis was as the energy builds, mounts, and then dissipates itself. We call that the archetypal level, or clubs. Now the two intermediate suits, one is called hearts, has to do with artistic creative endeavors, and the other called diamonds has to do with the world of the mind and the way we think about ourselves and about our world. And all of these discussions are useful because the game of ACES to ACES is probably the most difficult and challenging game that you will ever play, because it demands a lot of insight into yourself, into the world around you, into how creative things occur, and about the processes that are at work behind the scenes in the cosmos in terms of energy, interpenetrating matter and causing change over time. In this video, as we navigate this tortuous turn here, we're going to talk about the world of mind and what we call the psychological realm. The psychological realm, the world of mind, is how we represent the world to ourselves and to others. And that representation of the world can be objective, like the world all around us, or it can be subjective, the world within us. Diamonds is probably the most encompassing of the cards realms or suits, because you have to use your mind to understand the other aspects of the world, of the material world, the creative world, and the world of energies that exists, that creates change over time in the world, causing tension, which leads to crisis, and the mind and the heart have to come up with the solutions, because if we don't use our minds and hearts to come up with the solutions to the kinds of crises that exist in the world, there will be a resolution, and that resolution could include us in a creative way, which we call destiny, or preclude us in an uncreative world, which we call, Vanessa, fate. So every resolution of the tensions leading to crisis is the solutions, and finally resolutions either ends up with everyone and everything moving forward together creatively and in alignment with some future destiny, or it results in a huge setback where everybody suffers and we have fate. And there's no better example of that than the current problems we're having with the climate on the planet. Whether you believe that carbon dioxide contributes to it or not, we are seriously going through a crisis on the planet in terms of water, weather, and all the various species on the planet are in decline, except our own. In the world of diamonds, which we also call swords, because it's easier to say swordsters than diamonds, the person who gets the ace of diamonds plays a role of interpreting experience in terms of what is going on, maybe in terms of cause and effect, but in terms ultimately of a bigger picture of relationships that ultimately we call holographic. Why do we call it holographic? Because the person who plays diamonds, or the person who is on that path in life, that realm, ultimately has to see the world from every possible perspective. And that seeing of the world from every perspective gives you a holographic image of the world within yourself and the world around you. And the goal of the person playing diamonds in the card game Aces to Aces is to become a king. And in the real world, if you became a king of diamonds, you would have the capacity to see the world from every possible potential point of view that it is possible for a human being to see the world from. So your goal as a diamond stirrer or a sword stirrer is to see the world in as many divergent perspectives as possible and integrate them all together so that they make a complete picture of the way the world is to the best of human capability. Now, like everything in life, there are steps along the way to accomplish anything worthwhile. In terms of a spadester person in the game, the steps lead up to dominating everyone and everything around you. And those steps include things like, first you got to survive, then you got to live like everybody else, thrive, live as well as everybody else. Then you have to get ahead, gain visibility and influence in the world around you on any possible level. It could be in business, politics, scientific investigation, whatever. And then eventually, once you have that influence, gaining power for yourself so you control stuff and eventually dominate it. That's the Spadester series. But in terms of the Heartster series, which is the Heart suit, it has to do with aspiring for something grand, working hard and failing at it repeatedly until you get to the point where you stick with it. And then once you stick with it, you kind of sort of get it tentatively, and then eventually there are various degrees of success leading up to mastery. And mastery is the king of hearts, is the ability to inspire many, many others to take up a similar path of creative expression without any desire for personal aggrandizement throughout this process, just because you love doing it. You'll notice that in the realms of spades in the material world, it's all about me. Self-aggrandizement, power, etc., etc. Doesn't have to be, but essentially the symbology represents me getting on top of everything and everyone and climbing, becoming the king of the hill, top of the heap. And you'll notice in hearts, it has nothing to do with all that recognition. It's just that you love doing something beautiful and creative so much, you have no choice in life but to pursue it to whatever ultimate conclusion you can arrive at. But in the world of diamonds, it's kind of a mix. And that mix is based on one principle, at least to a certain point, which we call the ego. In other words, you want to be smarter, particularly smarter. You want to be the smartest guy in the room, the smartest gal in the business, the smartest person in the state. There's a certain aspiration to wanting to be the top when it comes to understanding the world. So you're a professor, you have a job, you're supposed to learn something scholarly. You want to be the best professor around. Not necessarily the best professor you can be, because that involves the heart, but you want to shine, outshine everyone else. So there's a fundamental problem with whoever is playing the suit of cards called diamonds. They have to assume they want to be the brightest bulb in the otherwise lit room of whatever realm they're in. The first stage in the diamond sequence has to do with the cards of 2, 3, and 4 of diamonds. And that all that is about a mounting sense of hope. Hope that the world that you were born into is a place where you can prosper. A place where you can prosper. This is why the elites have such an advantage. If you're a scion or a child of a wealthy family with connections at Yale, Harvard, whatever it is, you are born with a natural optimism that you can get ahead because you got money behind you, you got education behind you, you got parentage behind you, you got genes behind you, and that gives you a very strong sense of optimism or hope about your future at a very young age. Now, that hope is just a hope. What you have to over time accumulate as the diamondster, as the swordster, has to do with the 5, 6, and 7 of diamonds. And that has to do with faith, not only in the gifts you were given subconsciously by your circumstances, but faith in yourself to take those tools, take those advantages that you have been born into. You yourself make the best of them. Faith in yourself or faith in your institutions, faith in the advantages that you've been given. You have to take that hope and bring it to a point where you can say, yeah, man, this can happen for me. When you get to the 8, 9, and 10 of diamonds, you have to take that hope and that faith and you have to accumulate knowledge. Now, knowledge has to do with facts, information. You have to know stuff. Whatever your career is that you are pursuing and you want to be excellent at, the best at, you have to master the body of knowledge associated with it. If you want to be a professor of physics, you damn well better learn your physics. If you want to be a businessman and get your MBA, you have to learn what it takes for a business to be successful. You have to master all the information and facts and tools and abilities associated with that. But just because you learn one group of knowledge very, very well doesn't admit you into a holographic view of the universe. Because if you want to become a court card, a jack, a queen, or a king of diamonds, you have to expand way outside your area of expertise and be able to incorporate interdisciplinary studies on many, many, many different levels and many, many different points of view associated with those studies. So now we're up to the Jack, Queen, and King of diamonds. This is where you have to start putting it all together into a big picture. A big picture that covers every realm of human understanding. Very, very, very few individuals ever achieve a court card of knowledge. They may become really superb in isolated areas of understanding and knowledge. They may master physics. They may master astronomy or mathematics. They may master business practices. They may master political science. They may become great politicians. They may have a great sense of art history. Doesn't matter whatever subject area it is, but as soon as they get outside that area of expertise, it's like falling off a rock. They have very limited interdisciplinary understanding. And that interdisciplinary understanding isn't just things that are similar to it. It has to spread out in every possible direction of knowledge. Biology, philosophy, psychology. It has to spread out to geology. It has to spread out into a vast range that encompasses as much as is known as possible by human beings. Oh, look at that view. That's got to be Mount Adams there. We're up to the Jack, Queen, and King, the court cards of holographic perception, understanding of a vast array of information. Does that mean you're an expert in every one of these disciplines? Absolutely not. But you know how they all connect together. You know, kind of like ecology is in the natural world. Ecologists understand how animals and plants and minerals and roots in the soil and atmospheric gases, sunlight, the seasons, how all these things connect up to create a natural world where you have spring of growth and the summer of great success and vitality, and then the fall where things begin to decline, and then the winter of fallowness. They understand a vast range of information. Ecology is probably one of the most holographic of all the sciences. But now we're talking about things like the universe, God, cosmos, connecting everything up to everything else, and the broadest possible perception of reality that looks not only at things like substance, but things like energy, and things like even like spirit, which some believe is behind everything that exists. The prima causa, the first cause, and how that first cause created the entire universe and everything in it. A biological life, psychological life, sentience, creativity. This is what we call a holographic understanding, all the way down to being a human being and the natural environment. One of the most important teachings of the game of Aces to Aces that you have to master is that everything occurs in 3 phases. There is the phase of potential, what we call the nascent phase, where nothing seems to be going on, but behind the scenes, in the subconscious, in some deep level, something is germinating. That's called nascence. And when it comes to holographic perception, nascence is the Jack of Diamonds. You don't even know what's going on, but all those things you've been learning all your life in so many areas of life are starting to connect up without you even knowing it. That's called the Jack of Diamonds. The next level up is, as these processes of everything connecting up begin to actually intertwine like roots in the layer of the minerals in a forest, right? As they happen, they really begin to connect up. You may not be aware of it, but someone else with holographic perception will start to notice, hey, this person over here is really starting to get how everything connects to everything else. So somebody who is a holographic perceiver would notice that that's happening inside you, and that person will necessarily at least be a queen of diamonds, if not a king. But there comes a point where you yourself actually see evidence of the fact that you're starting to make sense of everything that's going on in the world, politically, scientifically, educationally, creatively, and artistically, in terms of business, in terms of religion, in terms of every aspect of life starts to make sense to you. And one of the clues that you've accomplished this is you no longer judge everything critically. You're not out there dissecting and slicing and saying politicians are bad and that religious leaders are a bunch of posers. No, you will see a broad spectrum. There are true statesmen and stateswomen. There are truly spiritual people out there who are actually helping to lead humanity forward. There are philosophers, there are scientists, all who are philanthropic, who aren't in it for themselves, and at the same time, there are the ones who are in it for themselves, and you can see all these different levels on a spectrum of understanding, and you won't judge anymore because you begin to see that they're all part of a series of steps that leads ultimately to something that some people might call divinity. King of Diamonds is someone who previously had like created a pyramid. You know, a pyramid got sloping sides, but in this case it's truncated pyramid. They have gathered a lot of information about a lot of things, but there is no capstone, no peak to that pyramid. And every time you look at the opposite side, the obverse side of a dollar bill, you will see that there's this shining eye, I believe it's called the Eye of Horus, at the top of the pyramid that completes the capstone. And once someone begins to develop that capstone, that shining eye of what we will call the creative imagination, they have entered into the court cards of diamonds. And once that is completed, and that capstone, luminous, creative imagination of the Eye of Horus, if you will, is completed, that's when someone has become a king of diamonds. Now, whether such beings exist or not, we don't know. But we do have the idea that it does exist, and we have exemplars from the past. Now,
Getting closer.
So, now we get a sense that the diamonds is the one that has to do with how we look and cognize, interpret and understand the world to ourselves. And that world is small to begin with and gets larger and larger and larger. And once we get to a court card, I will tell you this, from my own understanding, the ego starts to dissolve. Because the ego is only vested, largely vested in things it can master. And the ego does not have the creative imagination to hold the big picture in view. Which is why the swordster or the diamondster may be initially motivated by self-aggrandizement and self-importance. But by the time it gets to the Jack of Diamonds, it looks out at the universe and says, everything is much, much bigger than I ever thought possible, and I am much, much smaller than I ever thought I was. So a transition is made at some point. And while that transition is going on, you let go of all your selfishness to some degree or another. You start to say, you know what, I got to stop criticizing other people because, frankly, I was the same way.
Yes, it's up to you.